Well, Mel, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Marius.
Mel, as a social futurist, you look at Europe, the main trends affecting the continent, and how Europe is going to change into the future. Our audience in Africa is very interested in Europe. It's one of our biggest trading partners. What do you see as the future of Europe, demographically, politically? What do you see happening in the region?
Well, that's the £1,000,000 or €1,000,000 question, really, Marius, because there are huge debates going on about what ever closer union really means. That's the philosophical problem for Europe. In its founding documents, this term, ever closer union, was not clearly defined. So we've had the euro introduced. It's not hard to see that if that is widespread accepted, that we'll have fiscal union, a central governing bank that sets monetary policy for all of Europe. That hasn't happened yet, although the Greek situation suggests it's getting closer. Once that happens, we may very well have a political union, a United States of Europe, as it were. I think that's problematic because it puts too much power in Strasbourg and Brussels and basically strips nation states of their power. There'll be some devolved powers for the cities, but that's about all.
So the rationale behind the EU, from what we understand, is that they can compete better as a bloc around the world, globally, trade with one another, which brings a lot of benefits, but also there are these dangers. In the African context, as we look at the potential for integration and Pan-Africanism and trade, what are some of the lessons that Europe is learning that we should be thinking about as Africans?
Well, one of the big lessons, I think, Marius, is to recognise up front the huge cultural differences that exist between nation states. In Europe's case, these are very old countries with very long traditions, and they have vastly different cultural approaches to things like taxation. In Greece, for example, VAT sales tax is much less than the rest of Europe. There's differences in attitudes to entitlements. In Greece, you can retire 10 years earlier than you can in Germany, which doesn't thrill the Germans. And then you've got differences in approaches to things like work. The very idea of work, what it's for. These are cultural differences. And when the Eurozone was formed, and the EU, in fact, before that, there was no attempt to recognise those things. And what we've had is an attempt to really paper them over with Euro cash, and it hasn't worked.
So we see this unification of Europe increasingly around this idea of regionalism, and you're putting the emphasis on the differences within those regions. Yet there's a lot of talk about globalization and the unification of culture, multiculturalism, and finding a way of coexisting across different cultures. Which of these trends do you see dominating as we go into, say, the next decade, 2 or 3 decades?
Well, I don't necessarily think that cohesion is the same thing as denial of identity. In fact, I think cohesion, true social cohesion, is when groups of different identity decide to get on well together. Not only to tolerate one another, because tolerance has a sort of a downward-looking perspective. It looks down on someone and says, well, look, I tolerate you. How good am I? Whereas respect has an even or upward-looking perspective. I know that you're different to me, but I can learn from you. And so I don't think social cohesion is the denial or negation of identity. I think identity is needed even within a social cohesive unit. So I think the future is about understanding the differences between us, trying to speak through those and to those differences, not hide them, which is a little bit what has happened in the EU.
Europe, historically, over the last decade at least, or the last century, has been strongly aligned with the rest of the Western countries, particularly the United States. We see the rise of China. We see tremendous growth in East Asia in population growth. We see Africa, demographics growth. Does Europe at some point pivot to the East, given challenges around the likes of Russia, the Ukraine, current issues? How does Europe navigate this future, and what may that mean for the African continent?
Well, I think Europe will continue to look east in terms of building relationships globally. In an age of globalisation, of course, it's going to look east and west. So yes, there'll be closer relationships with parts of Asia than there are at the moment. There'll be greater cultural exchange with parts of Asia. Russia's an unknown quantity. Much depends on what Mr. Putin and his teams decide to do in the governance of Russia. About 10 years ago, there was much greater openness within Russia to European ideas, and vice versa. And since, the trade has dried up a little bit, there have been sanctions applied to Mr. Putin's team. I think that globalization means what the name suggests. There will be greater cooperation between nations of all kinds. But I think there'll be, after the Greek crisis and the recession before it, a greater wariness on the part of Europe, for example, when it comes to its trading partners. And that might affect South Africa, because Europe will be more wary about who it's getting into bed with and whether that partner can match up to the EU's expectations. So the South African government, for example, might need to make some changes to prove that its economy and its political situation are actually stable for the long term.
Of course, when we talk about globalization and these international relationships, technology begins to play a pivotal role. Communication, digitization, increased connectivity. What do you see the role of technology being, not just in the governance space, but also in business and in society broadly?
Well, technology is only ever an expression of human desire, aspiration and need. I mean, the technology is not destiny. We are not a product of the technologies we use. We're a product of how we choose to engage them. We've seen that right through history, from the invention of the wheel, the invention of the bomb, to today's digital technologies. But one of the big things that's happening now is the automation revolution, the introduction of advanced robotics, nanorobotics, the building of microscopic machines from the atomic level up that can actually be injected into the bloodstream to keep monitoring things like heart rate, blood pressure, insulin levels. These are all very positive technologies in medicine, in prosthetics, in industry. We have almost now the advent of what is called Industry 4 in some parts of the world, where we leave behind old-style factories and we have remote, small production units all hooked up via the internet, working together over vast distances, which changes the face of industry altogether. So there are many waves of technology still to come. We're about halfway through the digital revolution. We haven't really started yet. And I think Africa is interesting because Africa has leapfrogged some other parts of the world, some other developing regions, in terms of acceptance of new technologies. And that's both a good thing and it does carry some dangers, I think.
Well, Fletcher, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Marius.